The following Basic Techniques article is brought to you by Scrapbooking.com magazine from the July 2011 issue. Square 1 Hand Overdyed Threads on Cardstock, Part 1 by author and artist Judy Kaufman. I fell in love with embroidery when I was 6. I learned stitches from my mother at the same time as I learned to draw, and in much the same way. It was all about color and design. Dots were French knots, lines were stems and straight stitches. For solid colors, it was the satin stitch. I still embroider, but these days I often choose cardstock as the surface to embellish, and to satisfy my craving for color, I turn to hand overdyed threads that provide bold and subtle color blends. Want to give it a try? It's lots of fun, easy and fast, the perfect way to add a unique touch to a card, scrapbook page, mixed media project, or a piece of jewelry. Working on cardstock is different from stitching on fabric. Here are the basics to get you started. Needles. Embroidery needles have sharp points and are used for stitching on cardstock. Needle size is determined by thread choice. A needle with smaller eye for 1 or 2 strands of floss, a needle with a larger eye for 6-strand floss, pearl cotton, crewel wool, or metallic braid. Buy a pack of assorted size embroidery needles so you have options. Threads. I used hand overdyed 6-strand embroidery floss for all of these projects. The mix of bold and subtle color changes in these threads takes stitching to a level that is different from solid colors. It's more like painting, with results that are unexpected and exciting. For bolder lines, use all 6 strands, or 3 strands where that looks better to your eye. For fine lines, use a single strand. Cardstock. With care, it's possible to stitch on almost any paper or cardstock. However, it's wise for beginners to choose a heavy weight. Choosing stitches. A fast Google image or video search for hand embroidery stitches will provide thousands of diagrams and videos. Local libraries, friends, and family members are also a great resource. All of the samples shown were done with straight and running stitches, French knots, random cross stitches, plus knotted fringe and loops. You'll notice that some of the stitches are precise and evenly spaced, while some are more random. Some stitches are long, others short. Whether your style is casual or formal, there are options that will be a good fit. Piercing cardstock. Stitching on cardstock works differently from stitching on fabric. You need a paper piercing tool for pre-piercing the holes into which the stitches will go. You can also use a sewing machine without thread set on basting length to create evenly spaced holes for hand stitching. Remember, holes will not self-close in cardstock the way they do on fabric. Holes pierced in the wrong place will remain visible but can easily be camouflaged with an embellishment. And holes that are too close together will perforate the cardstock so that it tears. All holes for stitches must be pierced from the top of the cardstock so you can see and control the placement. During piercing, the cardstock must be placed on a soft piercing pad, such as a piece of thick craft foam. For evenly spaced holes, or holes that create a pattern design, use a piece of plastic canvas, graph paper, or a designated paper piercing template. For randomly spaced holes, just trust your eye. Proportion. The space needed between the holes is determined by the kind of thread and needle used. The thread and needle you choose depends on how big the project is and how narrow or wide, dimensional or flat you want the lines or other stitches to be. With fine thread and a small needle, holes can be closer together. With heavier thread and larger needle, more space is required between the stitches. Larger, bolder motifs call out for heavier embellishment. Smaller, more delicate ones look better with finer threads or fewer strands of multi-strand floss. Color selection. You can't always tell from looking at a skein of hand overdyed thread how it will look when it's stitched. The color changes in some are very subtle and do not appear until many stitches are made, such as in the flower project. The color changes in others are much more distinct and appear more often. For example, the pendant uses only 1 thread, but looks like I use 5 different colors. And finally, stitching. Like fabric, stitches begin with the threaded needle underneath the cardstock. Use either a small flat knot or a bit of tape or glue to hold the tail. If you choose glue, it must be dry before you keep going. Unlike stitching on fabric, the needle must always be straight up and down, perpendicular to the cardstock. You can't scoop while stitching because cardstock isn't soft and pliable. Turn the cardstock over each time you make a stitch so that you'll see the next hole. Sometimes you'll be looking at the front or top of the cardstock, and other times you'll be looking at the back or the bottom. A needle threader is helpful and inexpensive. Sharp scissors and good lighting are a must. And don't be vain, get out your reading glasses so you can see what you're doing. Cut the floss or thread so you're working with a piece that measures the length of your forearm plus your hand, about 18 inches. Longer pieces can knot or tangle. And don't pull too hard. Use an even tension and try to keep the threads from twisting so that they'll be smooth. Keeping stitches smooth is important, especially with longer stitches where twists and tangles will be easier to see. Consider using an embroiderer's laying tool to keep the stitches precise. Experiment on scrap cardstock before starting an actual project. And finally, to end a color and change to the next, or to add more thread when you're running out and want to continue, you'll need to tie off. Making sure the needle is on the back, make a small knot and trim the tail to about 1/4 of an inch. Or, instead of a knot, you can use glue or tape to secure the tail. To find the products mentioned in this article and shown in these layouts, check with your local scrapbook retailer. Browse our premier retail stores for coupons to a store near you. We hope you enjoyed this article from Scrapbooking.com magazine. Please check out all of the great articles and projects in this month's issue.